Hi, today we will talk about conditional sentences. If. Take a look at this sentence. If it is hot tomorrow, we will go swimming. This is an example of a conditional sentence. The function of a conditional sentence is that we want to tell others an action that we are going to do. For example, here, we will go swimming, but only with certain conditions. For example, only when if it's hot tomorrow that we will go swimming. So without this condition, we will not do this action. Therefore, this is called a conditional sentence. And for the first part of the conditional sentence, if you see the if, okay, this is called the if clause. And the part without the if, you see the action, we call it a main clause. There are actually 4 types of conditional sentence in total, namely type 0, type 1, type 2, and type 3. But in grade 8, we are not going to explore type 3. You will learn it in grade 9. So let's take a look at type 0, type 1, and type 2 conditional sentences and find out the differences in between. Can you find out the differences between these 3 sentences? Take a look. Yes, actually the verbs used in these 3 conditional sentences are different. For example, in type 0, you will see present tense. In type 1, you will see present tense plus future tense. In type 2, you see past tense and would infinitive. We use these tenses to distinguish different types of conditional sentences. Then why do we need different types of conditional sentences? Because we use them to talk about different conditions. Let's take a look at the type 0 conditional sentence first. If I drink coffee at night, I cannot sleep well. Very obviously, this sentence, the conditional inside, is about some fact, some truth, okay, that happens all the time. So we'll use present tense in the if clause and present tense in the main clause to talk about condition like this, okay? Some fact, some truth, some habit that happens all the time. If I drink coffee at night, I cannot sleep well. But for type 1 and type 2, they are different. They're different. They are not fact, they are not habit. There's something that hasn't happened yet. Something in the future, and then we are going to do some action in the future, and we want to give some condition to the actions in the future. So we have type 1 and type 2. For example, in type 1, if it rains tomorrow, we will cancel our hiking trip. So it's something in the future, tomorrow. It hasn't happened yet, okay? It hasn't rained yet. We're just making a prediction in the future. But if we have this condition, then we will do this action. Okay, if it rains tomorrow, then we will cancel our hiking trip. Alright? For type 2 conditional sentence is similar to type 1 conditional sentence. It hasn't happened yet. Okay, the condition hasn't happened yet. But the main difference between type 2 and type 1 conditional sentence is that the conditional here in type 2 is impossible to happen, very less likely to happen. But for type 1, it's actually very possible to happen. For example, in this sentence, maybe the speaker has already checked the weather forecast and know that very likely it will rain tomorrow. So this condition is very likely to happen. So the speaker will use type 1 conditional sentence. But for type 2, it is impossible to happen. It's impossible for you to become me. Okay? But I still want to talk about if this conditional happen, what action will appear. So we will use type 2 conditional sentence. Now let's take a look at the form of each conditional sentence more carefully and in detail. Type 0 conditional. As I've mentioned before, in a conditional sentence there are two clauses. The first part, when you see the if, it is the if clause, and the part with the action is called the main clause. Okay? And to remind you once again, for type 0 condition, we talk about fact, truth, habit, something that always happen in a present, okay? So we will use type 0 conditional sentence. And in type 0 conditional sentence, how do we identify it? We look at the verbs, okay, in if clause and main clause. The verb in the if clause here is drink, and the verb in the main clause here is don't sleep. And in type 0 conditional sentence, both verbs in both clauses will be in present tense. Present tense. This is how we distinguish type 0 conditional. Okay, for type 1 conditional sentence, we talk about something hasn't happened yet, in the future, but very likely to happen, possible to happen. And the verb in the if clause of a type 1 conditional is in present tense, and the verb in type 1 conditional in the main clause is future tense. If it rains tomorrow, we will cancel our picnic. Okay, so remember, type 1 conditional, present tense plus future tense. Okay, for type 2 conditional sentence, same as type 1 conditional sentence, it talks about something hasn't happened yet in the future, but well, it's different from type 1 conditional sentence because it's not likely to happen, it's impossible to happen. For example, take a look at this example. If there was an earthquake, I would hide myself under a shelter. For example, maybe in this country, it's not likely to have earthquake to happen, so we'll use type 2 conditional sentence. And for type 2 conditional sentence, we'll use past tense plus would infinitive. Okay, and we're not going to talk about type 3 conditional sentence right now. Okay, so this is the first short introduction about conditional sentence. I hope you remember that there are 3 types of conditional sentence, namely type 0, type 1, and type 2. For type 0, it talks about fact and truth, something happen all the time. And for type 1, type 2, we talk about things that haven't happened yet in the future. But for type 1, it's possible to happen, but for type 2, it's very not possible to happen. And remember the tenses used in different types of conditional sentence. For type 0, we use present tense plus present tense. In type 1, present tense, future tense. For type 2, past tense, would infinitive. Okay, so this is the end of this video. Thank you. Bye-bye.